we're going to multiply the following polynomials together. In our first example, notice we have a monomial, 4x to the third, times a binomial, negative 2x to the second, plus 3x. This should remind you of a property that we've used in the past, namely the distributive property. We're going to multiply this 4x to the third times negative 2x squared. Now this is where you have to be very careful, because in the previous sections you were just adding your polynomials. Now we're going back to multiplying. Negative 4x to the third times a negative 2x to the second. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. And do you remember the rules on multiplying monomials? As long as the bases are the same, we're going to add the exponents. So it's a little confusing because even though we're multiplying here to get the product of the variables, we're going to have to add those exponents. So this becomes negative 8x to the 3 plus 2, which is 5. Let's try it one more time. We've got 4x to the third. Now we're going to multiply it by 3x. So again, we're going to multiply the two numbers together, 4 times 3, 12. And then we're going to have to remember the multiplication rule for exponents, which is x to the third times x. Now don't forget, even though the exponent's not there, you can imagine there's a 1 as the exponent. 3 plus 1 is 4. So that gives us x to the fourth power. Now you have to keep in your mind straight what operation we're doing. Here we're multiplying, but remember when we're multiplying monomials, we add those exponents. So sometimes it gets a little bit tricky. Be very careful when you're working. Let's try our second one. We have a monomial, 6xy, times this trinomial, x to the third plus 2x squared y minus y squared. Again, we're going to work as we did in that first example by using the distributive property. So we're going to multiply the first two together, 6, and there's no number to multiply by, so that just gives us 6. Now you have to be careful and work slowly so you don't make mistakes. Remember that both of these exponents are 1. I'll write them up to remind us. We're multiplying x to the first times x to the third. So we're going to add these exponents because we're multiplying monomials. We add the exponents, 6x to the fourth power. And then we just tack on the y there. Nothing to multiply it with. Let's continue. 6xy. Now it's multiplied by 2x squared y. So work very cautiously. 6 times 2, 12. Let's look at our x's. I have x to the first times x to the second. That's right, x to the third. And finally I have y times, that's y to the first. So 1 plus 1 gives me y to the second power. We're almost done. We have to work very carefully, as I said, because it's very easy to make a mistake in these types of problems. I have a positive 6xy times a negative y squared, which will give me a negative product. So let's take care of the sign first of all. I don't have anything to multiply with the 6, so it becomes a 6. X, nothing in the x's, but I do have a y to the first times that y to the second. So again, we're going to add those exponents. 1 plus 2 give me x to the third. So the product of this monomial with this trinomial is this trinomial, 6x to the fourth y plus 12x to the third y squared minus 6x to the third. I know it's a lot of work, but the more you practice, the easier it will become. Let's try our next one. Now this one's a bit different. We have a binomial, 5x minus 1, times another binomial, x minus 2. I'm sure you're acquainted with the FOIL rule, F-O-I-L. Remember that stands for first, outside, inside, last. Now when we're talking about the first, that means within each binomial, the first entries, in this case, are 5x and x. O stands for the outside. If I look at the binomials together as a group, the outside numbers are 5x and negative 2. I stands for the inside. Again, if I look at the binomials as a group, if these guys are outside, then these guys are inside. And finally, last, again, splitting apart the two binomials. In the first binomial, this is the first term, this will be the last term, first term, last term. So these two are our last terms. So to multiply binomials, we're going to use this FOIL rule. F, multiply the first terms. 5x times x is 5x squared. Let me write that down. 5x times x is 5x squared. Because remember, we're multiplying these x's together, which have exponents of 1. 1 plus 1 give me a total of 2. Now we're moving on to O, the outside. We're going to multiply here 5x times negative 2. Well, that's not too bad. We know that negative 2 times 5 is negative 10, and then just throw on that x. So we did 5x times negative 2. Now we're on the I. We're going to do the insides. The inside numbers, remember, are the negative 1 and the x. We're going to multiply these two together. Negative 1 times x. That's not bad. Negative x. And finally, last, negative 1 times negative 2, the two last numbers, which give me a product of positive 2. Now you can either remember this FOIL, first, outside, inside, last. Or if you look at this really carefully and look at my arrows, I kind of used a distributive property. I've multiplied 5x times both of these entries in my second binomial. I've multiplied by the 1 by both these entries in my second parentheses. So if you forget this FOIL, you can always just go ahead and distribute once, distribute twice, and you'll get the same outcome. But now let's not stop here because we're almost done. I see I have a couple of like terms right there in the middle. I've got negative 10x and negative x. Now, we have to stop and think a bit. What are we doing? Here, we are adding these monomials, negative 10x and negative x. So we don't want to do anything to the variable portion. We write it as 5x squared, negative 10, and negative 1, negative 11. Don't forget at this point, since we are subtracting these, we're not going to do anything to the exponent part. So that stays as 11. I put on the plus 2 at the end, and there I have it after I either FOILed or used the extended distributive property on these two binomials. My product is 5x squared minus 11x plus 2. Let's multiply a couple more binomials. In these two problems, we're going to multiply 3a plus 2b, our first binomial, times our second, 2a minus 3c. Now we can go ahead and use FOIL just to practice. Remember, FOIL stands for first, outside, inside, last. We're going to multiply the first two together, 3a times 2a, which gives me 6, the number is 3 times 2. A times a is a squared. Now we're going to do the outsides. 3a times negative 3c. We multiply those two together. Notice that one's positive and one's negative. That gives me a negative product. 3 times 3 is 9. And fortunately, in this one, it's a little easier. I don't have to worry about combining those because those are different variables. So I just write that as negative 9ac. That's O. Now we're on I. Insides. Here we go. These two together. 2b times 2a. Again, the variables are different, so we can't combine them. We're going to leave them separate. But 2 times 2 is 4. That gives me 4ab. And finally, L for last. We're going to multiply 2b times negative 3c. Again, we have a negative product since we have one negative number. That gives me negative 6. Let's look at the variable portion. We've got a b, we've got a c. Those are different, so we cannot combine them. So we get negative 6bc. So the product of these two binomials, let's check to see if we have any like terms. 6a squared minus 9ac plus 4ab, those were close but not quite, and minus 4bc. So if you look very carefully, even though these look real similar, they're all different, so there's nothing to combine. This is considered simplified form. Let's look at our second set of binomials. In the first one, we have 2x squared plus 3y squared. We're going to multiply it by our second binomial, 5x squared plus 6y squared. Here we go. Using the FOIL method once again, we have 2x squared times 5x squared. Now again, be very careful when you're working through these problems. 2 times 5 is 10. X squared times x squared, 2 plus 2, 4. That gives me x to the 4th power. Are you with me on that? 2x squared times 5x squared is 10x to the 2 plus 2, 4. Now we're ready to move on to the outsides. 2x times 6y squared. 2 times 6 is 12. Notice that x squared and y squared, different bases, so we can't multiply those two together. We write it as x squared, y squared. Now we're on insides. We're going to multiply these two together. 3y squared times 5x squared. 3 times 5, 15. And notice again, I've got different variables. I've got a y squared and an x squared. But remember, just whenever we're working with a long string of variables, we like to list them in alphabetical order because that's considered standard notation. So instead of writing y squared, x squared, and because, once again, multiplication is commutative, we can rewrite y squared, x squared as x squared, y squared. So we'll write it this way, x squared, y squared. Finally then, we're going to multiply 3y squared times 6y squared. 3 times 6, 18. Y squared times y squared. Add those exponents because the bases are the same. Y to the 4th power. Go back and check, do we have any like terms? Well, because we rearranged this third term here, it's easy for us to identify that these two middle terms are like terms. So we're going to combine those two together. We rewrite the 10x to the 4th plus, now again, think of the operation that we're doing. We're doing addition. When we add these monomials, we combine the numerical coefficients, and we're going to leave the variable portion just as is. So you got to keep that straight. Adding these two together, I'm going to get 27. These do not change. They're going to stay as x squared, y squared. I know it's very confusing because we're interchanging addition and multiplication. Here, we're adding. Up here, we were multiplying. When you multiply, that's when you mess with those exponents. When you're adding, you can only add them if you have like terms, and the variable portion remains the same. That takes care of those two middle terms. And finally, we have 18y to the 4th. That doesn't change at all. So the product of these two binomials is this trinomial down here at the bottom, which is 10x to the 4th plus 27x squared y squared plus 18y to the 4th power.